Hey everybody, welcome back to HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com, and here on my YouTube channel, and this time out we're going to take a look at a brand new plugin by Waves called the CLA MixDown, or the Chris Lord Algae MixDown plugin. This is another plugin that's added to kind of the CLA series of plugins. In the past they've created these kind of all-in-one, easy to lay out, easy to use, simplistic, without having to know what's under the hood and get into all the technical EQ and compression and saturation and stuff type settings. They've done this for groupings of instruments. They've done a CLA drums plugin, a CLA bass plugin, a vocals plugin, an unplugged or an acoustic plugin, and also a bass plugin. And now they have the CLA Mixdown plugin. So you can look on it right here in front of you on the screen here. What this is intended to do is to be able to drop on your master output bus to easily add EQ, compression, and saturation all in one plugin, where you don't have to know all the different intricacies and technical things about using these types of plugins. So typically what you would use, or what I've used and what most people have used in the past before a plugin like this, is you would use things, separate plugins. Like you may use like some saturators here. Here's some by Slate Digital. On your master output, you use maybe an SSL or a different type of bus compressor on your master out. And then you would use things like a tape machine on your master out. And what this plugin is intended to do is to kind of replace all of those, so you have it all in one plugin. So let's take a walk through the plugin. It's really simple to use, and we'll listen to it on a final mix here so you can kind of see what it does. Now, what they recommend in the manual is that you put this plugin at the very end of your master output bus before you start mixing. You want to kind of mix into this plugin, so during the course of your mix through all your individual tracks, you're kind of getting that final sound as you go. You can just put it on at the end of the mix, at the very end, which is what I did here because this mix was already done, and you'll get great results as well. But they recommend putting it on before you start mixing. So just a footnote to remember. So let's take a look at the plugin. Real simple layout. So over here on the left hand side, you have the input fader here, and at the default level it's set to 0 unity gain with some input meters here. Okay. Over here to the right of that, we have our big two meters here, which we can view the input, the gain reduction or compression, and the output level, so we can check all three to see what our plugin is doing. In the center section here, we have a bass control, a treble control, a glue control, which is really your compressor or compression, and then a drive control, which is like saturation, kind of emulating hitting an SSL console, hitting the mix bus more or less, depending on how you increase or decrease the fader. You can increase and decrease the faders plus or minus 10 dB. You can also shut each individual part of the plugin off, or each module of the plugin off, right here. And then on the glue, on the compressor, we have a little 1 and a number 2, where there's two different types of compressors modeled. The first one here, number 1, is a more modern style compressor. And according to the manual, number 2 is a little bit more of a vintage classic style compressor. And then to the right of that, we have our output meters here with our output faders, so we can level match the plugin. If we're hitting it harder on the way in, you may want to turn down the output so you can get a nice accurate before and after, so the volume is the same. Now with all Waves plugins, and this is no exception, if you hit this load button, they have a handful of presets as well, which is a good starting point. But one of the main advantages of using a plugin like this, let's just go back to the full reset here for a second, is that a lot of times you can just run signal your mix through this without doing anything, keeping everything at 0, and it adds a nice enhancement to the mix. So let's bypass this at first, and let's go ahead and let's just listen to the mix with no plugins on the master bus. Now, as I showed you a few minutes ago, I have the virtual console collection, some saturation plugins, a stereo bus compressor here by Waves, and then a tape machine, and I've shut all of those plugins off because this mix was done before I actually downloaded this plugin. So I just shut off all my master bus processing, and the only thing we're going to be listening to is the Chris Lord Algae Mixdown plugin. So here it is bypassed. Let's listen back to a little part of this mix, and then I'll go ahead and I'll just turn it on so you can hear it halfway through with just running signal through it. No, not moving the faders at all. Okay, and then we'll take a walkthrough, and I'll show you some different uses and how you can use this and what effect it can have on your mix. So here we go.
As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see.
Okay, so just turning it on and bypassing it, and again, I just turned down the master output a little bit to kind of level match the plugin because it gets a little bit louder as we're compressing, but just keeping everything at its default setting and running signal through it or running your mix through it, you can instantly hear that the mix gets a little bit tighter, gets a little bit more polished, it gets a little bit more high-end frequency, and everything just gets a little bit tighter and a little bit more lively sounding without doing anything. So one way to use this is just to throw it on there and just keep it at its default setting, and it definitely makes a difference. So now let me take you through the controls and kind of explain to you how you may want to use this a little bit more effectively if you want to get a little more into this. So on the input side, according to the manual, what you want to do when you're playing back your audio at kind of its loudest sections, you want this little LED above the fader cap here to be in a yellow or amber state. When it's green, it means that you should increase your input a little bit to hit it a little bit harder. If it's red, it's obviously going to be too much. It's going to be clipping. But when it's yellow, it's where you're actually hitting the sweet spot of the plugin, and they recommend that in the manual. So let's take a look at that and see where we are, and I'll turn the fader up and down so you can see how this LED changes colors.
I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated.
Okay, so you can see just pushing it up a couple of dB on the input side, we're staying at a steady amber color. If I push it a little bit too hard, you'll see it start flickering red. We don't want to do that. We want to keep it in that yellow or amber state. That's the kind of optimum, kind of the sweet spot. And you can play around with that. Now you can also use the input. You can view it on the VU meter here by hitting the input. You can see by as I turn this up and down how it changes the needle in the VU meter. So let's take a look at that.
The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think.
Okay, so it also recommends that although you're changing this color to amber and you're pushing it to make sure that the input lamp is amber, you also want to make sure that you're staying somewhere around 0 to maybe plus 1 dB, and then at its loudest sections where it gets a little bit more dynamic, it may go up to plus 2, plus 3 dB. You just don't want to bury the needle the whole time. Okay, so it's just something to play with, something to keep in mind. So now that we have it set to its kind of optimal performance, okay, if we go over here to the center section, we'll turn this over to gain reduction. We can see we have a bass and treble control to give us a little low end or high end, plus or minus 10 dB on each one of these faders in the center. So I'll demonstrate what the two EQ settings doing, bass and treble.
I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. Or see me running through the hayfields. That's your dream. I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you.
So you can hear there, just by turning the bass on and off and moving it up and down, no matter where you go, plus or minus 10 dB on both the treble and the bass faders, they're still very musical. They never get spiky. They never get way too muddy or way too boomy. So depending on your mix, a lot of times, again, I'm just setting it here at 0 dB. But just by turning them on and off here, you can hear what enhancement it actually makes to the mix. So if you have a mix that sounds a little thin or needs a little bit more bottom end, this is a nice kind of a finishing EQ, almost like a mastering EQ. You can kind of think of it that way, where no matter what you're doing here, it stays very musical, which I really like. Now over here on the glue, this is really our compression. More glue is going to give us more compression. Less glue is going to give us less compression. Again, we can keep it on the gain reduction meter here so we can see what we're trying to achieve. Now, typically on a master bus, I like to stay no more than about 2 to 3 dB of compression. You don't want to squash the life out of it. The more compression you have, you're going to hear the dynamics get a lot less, and it's going to start to sound a little bit more flat and a little bit more muddy sounding. So I'll demonstrate that now, and then you can always just take the compressor on its own in and out, and you can hear what it's doing to the mix.
Not what you expected. You can stand and smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. You'll see me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change just to suit you. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort.
So you can hear when you enable the compressor how the snare and the kick get really tight and really punchy. Now also keep in mind that the more you drive the low end, the more you drive the bass fader too, that compressor is going to react a lot more to the low end. So it's kind of a juggling act. So if you're adding a lot more bass to your mix, realize what that is also going to have an effect on the compressor. So the more low end you add, you may want to turn down the glue or the compression so you're not, again, over squashing it. Again, so this is a real musical compressor. Even at its highest setting, it still sounds kind of musical. It's a little too much compression, and obviously the volume's going to drop, so you would turn up your output to make up for that volume reduction from all that compression. But again, right around 3 dB of compression, right around the, just slightly above the middle setting at unity, it sounds pretty good there. Now and then we can also flip back and forth between the two types of compressors. Now, depending on what you're listening to this video on, if you're listening to this on an iPhone or earbuds or an iPad or really small or cheap laptop speakers, you're not really going to hear the difference between these two compressor types. It is very subtle, but if you're listening to this on a good set of cans or a good set of studio monitors, you'll hear a slight difference. And again, it's subtle. I'll demonstrate that now. Not sure how YouTube is going to pick it up. It is quite subtle. They both sound very musical, but there's not a whole lot of audible difference between the two, but let's listen to it. So I'll just toggle back and forth between 1 and 2, and then I'll turn off the compressor so you can hear what it does to the overall mix.
Single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand and smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. You'll see me running through the hayfield.
Okay, very subtle between the two different types of compressors, but very musical overall. I mean, it sounds really, really good. I mean, this is a great plugin for someone who really doesn't want to worry about attack times, release times, ratio settings, input and output, and all that other stuff. They just want something that just sounds good, drops it on and go. This is a great plugin. It sounds very musical, no matter where you kind of set everything. So it's really, really, really cool. Now, last but not least, here we have the drive setting. Now, this is kind of simulating or emulating pushing an SSL mix bus, the SSL console's mix bus, harder to get that more harmonic distortion. So the more drive you put in, the more kind of grit and a little more harmonic distortion and color you're going to get. The less drive you put in, the less of that you're going to get. Again, a very subtle thing. It's not as obvious as the bass and the treble. So again, depending on your listening system that you're listening to this or watching this video with now, will depend on how much you can hear this. But I will push it up and bring it down and turn it on and off so you can hear the difference. So here we go.
As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand and smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change.
Adds a little more excitement to the mix for sure. There's no doubt about that. Again, it's subtle, but it definitely adds a little bit of extra secret sauce, if you will, to the soup. So that is the drive control. Now, once again, we can also monitor and we can look at our VU meters here. We can look at the input signal and the output signal as well. So here's our input.
No dress blowing in the wind. See me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change stars to suit you. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not.
Okay, so you can view the meters in 3 different ways. I typically keep it on gain reduction, but again, you can just hear when I bypass the plugin how the mix falls a little bit flat. So what I love about this plugin, and what I like about all the CLA plugins, the drums, the vocals, the bass, and such that all the guitars as well, is that they're not overly hyped. They sound musical. What I really love about this design of this plugin is that it's real simple to use, but everything sounds kind of musical no matter how much you push it. It doesn't have just one good setting. It really is a kind of set it and forget it kind of, throw it on there, move a couple of faders around and you're ready to go. And it just gives that little bit of enhancement to the mix. A lot of times what a lot of plugin manufacturers do is they overhype the plugin where you turn it on and the audible difference is so great that it doesn't really sound realistic. This sounds really, really good as far as that. It's subtle, it's musical, but it's certainly there and it certainly adds that little bit of something to the mix to tighten things up, and it doesn't sound like it's over processed, which is what I really, really like. So now the last thing we're going to do is I'm just going to cycle through a few of the presets here so you can hear what it does. Again, some are going to be more audible and more dramatic than others, but this just kind of gives you a good idea of what they sound like.
Make me not feel segregated. The fact of me being different is to you just another symptom. You can accept how I'm not what you expected. You can stand, I smoke and drink, and that I'm not what you may think. I don't know how this will be. I always thought I'd never lose you. What you get is what you'll see. I won't change just to suit you. No dress blowing in the wind. See me running through the hayfields. That's your dream, but that's not me. I won't change just to suit you. As far as I can remember, you never made a single effort to make me not feel segregated. The fact of
Okay, so all those presets, I mean, they're all very usable. Again, it's totally dependent on the material that you're sending through it. I'm typically not a big fan of presets, but this is a good way where you can just drop a preset on and then you can just tweak it from there. And as you notice, some of the presets will have the glue on or the drive on or off, or they'll turn off the bass and the treble. So there's a combination of these 4 faders that are in and out depending on the preset, and they're all very, very usable. So my recommendation is to try that, cycle through them, find out what works good for the mix that you happen to be working on, and then tweak it from there. But once again, I think this is a home run for Waves and for the CLA series of plugins. Again, super simple. You don't need to know a lot about compression. You don't need to know a lot about EQs and frequencies and mastering EQs. You don't need to know a lot about harmonic distortion. You just kind of throw it on there and go. So for someone who's new to these kind of plugins and is new to mixing and wants something that you can just drop on your mix and it instantly just sounds better, this is great. Now again, this is mostly used on the master output, but they also say in the manual that you can use these on bus tracks, like on a drum bus. If you wanted to route all your drums to a bus and put this on your drum bus, you could do that as well. But it's more designed to be used on the master output bus. And instead of having 4 or 5 separate plugins, you have everything in one plugin, which is great. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope you enjoyed taking a look at the Chris Lord Algae MixDown plugin by Waves. Again, go demo it. You could demo it for 14 days for free. And you can always see what they're selling it for. At the recording of this video, I think they're selling this plugin for about $29 or $39, and this is normally about a $150 plugin. So go check out Waves and see if you can pick it up on a deal, but I absolutely recommend that you demo it and check it out. It will absolutely make your mixes sound better, assuming that your mix is already good to start with. It's not going to take a bad mix and make it sound amazing. It's going to take a really good mix and it's going to make it sound great. And that's the key to any kind of plugin that you're using. So I've been Dave with HomeRecordingMadeEasy.com, and until the next video, video, check out homerecordingmadeeasy.com for all your training needs around mixing, mastering, and recording. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.
Thank you.